So let me answer that question straight away. Do we need indirect language patterns in hypnotherapy? Do we need so-called hypnotic language? And is it really anything to do with hypnosis? No, nope, on all counts. I'm not going to leave it there. So let me give you a more kind of comprehensive and rounded answer to that, rather than just being so dismissive, shall I? So, ideally, in the fields of NLP and modern hypnotherapy, we'd like to simplify communication. Yet there seems to be this kind of insistent proliferation of budding hypnotists being told that they must learn complex language patterns, often labelled hypnotic language. Mainly born out of the work of Milton Erickson, seemingly sort of bastardized by the fields of NLP, indirect hypnosis, and their proponents. If you're after good, thorough results in therapy with your hypnotherapy clients, it's not essential to have your brain cluttered with any seeming need to be able to rattle off complex language patterns. It's a nice skill to have, according to many, and having a great understanding of how successful hypnotherapists communicated is certainly nothing to be sniffed at. I've certainly studied Ericksonian language patterns. I teach them at my college, and I recognize that they have this place within this field. They have their place for sure. But just because someone is able to rattle off indirect language patterns that inspire awe in their students, such language usage is not indicative of successful therapeutic results. It just isn't. If you have some empirical data that demonstrates the accelerated efficacy of hypnotherapy when indirect language patterns are used, then forward it on to me. I'm more than happy to review and change my mind if the evidence is there. But currently, my research has led me to see that it's not. In the absence of that, I'll offer up the findings of Lynn, Neufeld and Mayer in 1993, who wrote a paper, Direct versus Indirect Suggestions, a conceptual and methodological review that featured in the International Journal of Clinical and Experimental Hypnosis. And they're quoted as saying that direct, traditionally worded hypnotic techniques appear to be just as effective as permissive, open-ended, indirect suggestions. I mean, that's it first and foremost. But there has been disagreement over the extent to which Erickson's approach can even be compared to previous forms of hypnotism, or even whether it might be better being called something else other than hypnotism, to avoid confusion. And one of the key difficulties here is that indirect suggestions appear to function by means of a fundamentally different mechanism from traditional hypnotic suggestions. So, just as an example, in 2008, Lynn, Kirsch and Halkvist defined hypnotic suggestion as requests for imaginative experiences, and state that perhaps they can be termed imaginative suggestions as a result. But by that definition, and numerous other definitions, much of Ericksonian hypnotherapy is clearly not employing hypnosis at all, and would perhaps be better labelled indirect suggestion therapy, which may or may not in turn out to be a useful therapeutic approach in its own right. But it certainly cannot claim to do so on the back of research on traditional direct suggestion hypnotherapy. For example, in the meta-analytic study mentioned previously, out of 57 randomized controlled trials that were reviewed, only 19% were found to have employed predominantly indirect techniques. Overall conclusions about the efficacy of hypnotherapy therefore relate mainly to the use of more traditional style type of techniques and ways of communicating. Additionally, if you examine an important review conducted by David Walk in 2008 that was entitled What We Can Do with Hypnosis, a Brief Note, in response to a paper, a really important paper by Chambliss and Holland in the late 90s, examining hypnosis studies using strict ratings and criteria to see if hypnotherapy can be recommended as an empirically supported treatment. And not one single study to feature in those reviews predominantly used indirect indirect language patterns. So it does not seem right that those who have only been taught an NLP language approach to hypnosis or conversational hypnosis or predominantly indirect hypnosis as the core of their hypnotherapy can honestly use the same research or evidence base that supports other more direct or traditional models used in the majority of research, because the two are different. You're comparing apples with oranges. If you want a handout with the studies listed in that featured and brilliant review that I just mentioned there, email me, ask me nicely, I'll send you on a copy. You know, you're welcome. Moreover, although it's often claimed by people promoting commercial workshops on Ericksonian hypnosis or indirect hypnosis or conversational hypnosis and language patterns, that indirect approach is dramatically, according to them, more effective than direct suggestion, especially with resistant clients. And this appears to be little more than marketing hype. Indeed, in a review of a number of independent studies comparing indirect suggestion styles that was conducted by Lin and colleagues, they found no evidence across these studies that indirect suggestions improved responses to test items on hypnotic susceptibility scales, as Ericksonians had predicted, or that they somehow bypassed the subject's resistance. It's a fallacy. Also, there are even indications that direct suggestions are superior to indirect suggestions in terms of modifying subjects' experience of hypnosis, according to that study of the studies. Unfortunately, the Ericksonian approach also has the disadvantage of being much more complex, time-consuming, less consistent with general principles of evidence-based psychotherapy. Many popular books and workshops tend to confuse students and mislead them about the nature of hypnosis and its role in psychological therapy, often making claims that are completely inconsistent with research in the field of hypnotism. Erickson's approach emphasized the notion that the therapist should try to circumvent the client's resistance by influencing them outside of their awareness using indirect means. And this kind of pulling the wool over their eyes approach to suggestion, which typically emphasizes almost like a need to deceive the client, the patient, about the content of suggestions supposedly given. And it fundamentally clashes with some of the basic professional values of modern therapy, which emphasize informed consent, collaboration and education, psychoeducation and so on. In the year 2000, Kerwin, Palmer and Ruddle, they made a point of specifying that the Ericksonian indirect suggestion approach potentially conflicts with basic collaborative stance in other therapies, such as CBT, for example. Because in cognitive behavior therapy, an open collaborative approach is used in which the theory and practice of each intervention are explained to the client. Direct suggestion, explicitly focusing on the particular problem concerned, is employed in the hypnosis scripts that they offer, and indirect suggestion is avoided as a result. Arguably, therefore, the indirect approach, characteristic of the followers of Erickson, insofar as it involves an element of deception, is inherently antagonistic to the basic principle of collaboration, which is at the heart of a working alliance in therapy. Traditional hypnosis, which employs direct, sort of conscious suggestions to which the client gives attention and voluntary consent, it's a different matter entirely and completely consistent with the principle of collaborative therapy. Direct suggestions, as I said earlier, are sometimes termed imaginative suggestions to highlight the fact that they are intended as explicit invitations for the client to actively imagine the things being described and are therefore addressed primarily to the individual consciously and with full awareness and understanding. James Braid's original definition of hypnotism was in terms of focused, conscious attention on a particular idea or mental image, accompanied by the conscious expectation that some response would happen as a result. Only later did authors seek to portray hypnotism in more obfuscating and mystifying terms. It's something to do with talking to the unconscious mind of the client. And you can go watch an earlier video of mine whereby I cover that subject of the unconscious mind in some detail, because that's a fallacy too. Consequently, sometimes other practitioners are quite concerned that hypnotists encourage this sort of magical thinking or surround themselves with mystique. And this is true of some approaches to hypnotherapy, but not others. It was, in particular, a criticism levelled against Erickson's approach by Barber, Theodore Barber, the prolific researcher. In a symposium discussion of one of Erickson's papers summarising some aspects of hypnosis research, Barber went on to say that it seemed to him that about half of Dr. Erickson's presentation was from a position of a natural scientist, a psychologist and a psychiatrist who's trying to understand what hypnosis was and is. The other half of the time, the presentation seemed to be from this position, according to Barber, of someone of many years ago who really thought hypnosis was mysterious and magical. The subject goes into this sort of trance, and when they're in trance, magic-like things happen. And it's implied that a kind of mysterious thing happens because of trance. And that's Barber quoted in Erickson's 1980 publication. This reference to Barber, this sort of quote of Barber, it's important because it highlights very clearly the fundamental difference in outlook between the Ericksonian tradition in hypnotism and other approaches, in particular represented by Barber, this common sense, skeptical, socio-cognitive perspective, which is dominant in the current research literature, but less common among hypnotherapists because of the lack of quality training and being exposed to that side of things. Many hypnotherapists are still drawn to Erickson's approach because and despite despite the lack of evidence supporting it. And it fascinates, intrigues and suggests that hypnotic change can be made by wielding language in a particular way. And article authors are suggesting that even that politicians have learned how to use these mysterious hypnotic communication tools to influence voters too. Now, suggestion can indeed create change without hypnosis at all. Everything that can be done with hypnosis can be done without hypnosis. Evidence suggests that. But if it's just suggestion, why state that people are being hypnotized when you're using this hypnotic language? Additionally, it seems to have become fashionable in the current climate of political fervour around the world, though particularly in the US and the UK, for hypnosis professionals and authors to write about how politicians are using mass hypnosis, using hypnotic language. Obama was apparently manipulating people with hypnosis, and Donald Trump's doing the same. And let's be honest, they're not. If you go Google the subject, you'll see that virtually all of these articles refer to the ways in which people or politicians are using language. Particular language patterns are getting pointed out and highlighted. And they're mainly indirect Ericksonian language patterns, or those espoused by the field of NLP. Many of the articles doing the rounds on the internet currently tend to confuse the public, as well as hypnosis students, misleads them about the nature of hypnosis and its role in psychological therapy, often making claims that are completely inconsistent with research in the field of hypnotism. In these articles, it's often suggested that the politicians using these hypnotic language patterns are saying things that are beyond our conscious awareness or circumventing resistance, as I referred to earlier on. Evidence suggests that hypnosis is actually collaborative. It requires the recipient or subject to engage in it, not to be a passive recipient of it. It's not something that just gets wielded upon people. It's a strong point that I want to make there. Hypnosis depends more on the efforts and abilities of the subject than on the skills of the hypnotist, as Hilgard stated as far back in 1965. And nothing has transpired to prove this, not to be true since. I've got a book of classic and brilliant speeches from throughout history. And when you pick away at the transcripts, you can see that a number of language patterns could be highlighted at times. That said, the field of NLP had not even been created at that time. Remember, NLP does tend to model what others do well. They weren't necessarily using NLP language patterns. It's potentially the other way round. Politicians continue to invest money in delivering their messages in hope and with the aim that we absorb information and subsequently we have our allegiance influenced. They want us to accept their message rather than others and to make a vote for them instead of their rivals. They want us to feel like life is going to be better if we vote for them. They want their message to appear more attractive, and so on and so on. Political messages and rhetoric are everywhere and anywhere. Are they actually anything to do with hypnosis, as numerous authors suggest, or to do with hypnotic language being used? Not really. It's clear for anyone to see that politicians do utilize a range of suggestive techniques to attempt to influence you. On occasions, politicians employ techniques whereby they want you to identify with their values, their message, and suggest that you and your loved ones will be better off as a result of them running things. But these politicians, like with salespeople and all kinds, they'll potentially even tell you what a brilliant, informed, and intelligent choice you made by choosing them or that product or making that choice. They may remind you of how wise you are for having made this choice, how better your life and the life of your family will be as a result of you choosing them. They may attempt to make you feel better informed, clever, enlightened, responsible, or whatever it takes for you to plant your flag in the ground beside them. And the point that I'm making here is that many people do draw parallels with the field of hypnosis because politicians use words and images in a way that's intended to influence your behavior and influence the way you vote. Ultimately, the way you support or have your political alignment. It's therefore not surprising that many people consider political speeches as mass hypnosis. We can see that within political speeches, suggestions are delivered. In hypnosis, we often consider our clients to be suggestible, of course. Suggestibility can be seen as an ability to welcome new ideas, being prepared to learn new things and take on other perspectives, for example. So then, as we take on new information, ideas and perspectives, depending on its relevancy and beneficial value to the individual, it may well affect a person's experience, anywhere from a little to a lot. In a hypnotherapy session, the client is the person being influenced and is therefore in some sense also suggestible. They've chosen to be there in some way and they're therefore open to making changes, obtaining new perspectives, affecting their experience in ways that are going to help them enjoy life more or cope with life better in some way. But if you examine, if you look at the work of Theodore Barber and some authors since then, you'll know that very few adults ever accept information without appraising it in some shape or form. There's a great big difference between suggestibility and gullibility. Hypnosis does not render people gullible, just accepting every suggestion they're given with no filter. Is the same sort of suggestibility present when we're subjective to political speeches delivered by prominent politicians? I don't really think so. We're open to new experience, of course. We may dig our heels in, even defend our other choices in opposition to the politician, for example. And though that can happen in therapy too, there is a difference. There's a number of parallels. Indeed, there's a number of parallels between how some schools of hypnosis explain hypnosis and some of the ways in which politicians deliver their messages, but politicians are not using hypnosis per se. Many even believe that unless a formal and consensual induction has taken place, hypnosis has not occurred. Some believe that unless there is understanding and agreement, hypnosis has not occurred. I mean, all of these things are open to debate, much debate, of course. But okay, so we might use certain terms related to hypnosis to describe the effects of political speeches from time to time and the use of hypnotic language by people looking to influence in general in life. But when you look closer, you see how easy it is to distinguish one from the other. When I'm looking to persuade or ethically influence my clients to change, I want them to be aware of it and to be able to know they were responsible for it. I want them to develop self-efficacy and therefore enjoy feeling self-empowered. And we help facilitate that. I think And as I say often, it's important that if you're going to learn to be an effective hypnotherapist or hypnosis professional and become roundly educated in the field, that you need to be aware of the full picture. Know both sides to what you do, and do not get starstruck just because someone is able to teach you that it's cool to use this influential adverb displacement double bind language pattern that they're able to reel off as they've been sat at home practicing. Educate, educate, be honest, be congruent, be well-intentioned, develop trust and an effective working alliance. And I think you'll find very little need for so-called hypnotic language patterns. And let's be honest, they're actually very little to do with hypnosis anyway. Thank you.